Flipping burgers and pumping gas is tiresome work. Already going hard, just pumping that gas, bang, bang, bang. I love making the song references and making you think I'm lame and old, because I am. I wouldn't want to spend my days doing things like that. No, man. I went to college for 3 years, just so I can stay up all night and help a news station air death, destruction, and despair. Bigger goals. Okay, anyway, if someone like Lana Turner was there in the building while I was doing the burger flipping, and that gas pumping, just pumping that gas, I'd find it a little easier to do this kind of work for this kind of low pay. Falling for her, or someone like her, might end up getting multiple people killed, but just look at her. Hot stuff. You know what's also hot? Unless you like a cold brew, and that's coffee. And our sponsors sell such a thing because they are Sparkplug Coffee. They carefully place the orders of Canadians and Americans right outside their door, and my fellow Canuck-type people will save some loonies and some toonies because they won't owe anything for the shipping. Sparkplug offers premium quality coffee, the best you've ever brewed. It's yards cheaper and tastier than takeout. Affordable, convenient. Why aren't you on their website right now? Well, okay, I haven't told you what the site is yet. It's sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Those last 4 letters are, of course, Have You Ever Seen's promo code. You'll save 20% by putting those letters into the appropriate box. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you that it would be wise to join the Autopilot Coffee Club. You can pause any time or even cancel. Maybe you've killed your boss, just so you can steal his wife, and quality beverages aren't any kind of priority right now. Sparkplug gets it. They'll report you to the cops, but they get it. So hit up that sparkplug.coffee website and find your new favorite. Well, you've got some great information about a quality coffee service. The time has come to give you a bunch of information about a sexy movie from a long time ago. And action! Have you ever seen The Postman Always Rings Twice? Hi, friends and neighbors, and thank you for checking out episode number 646 of the Classic Movies podcast that's been reviewing movies and spoiling all their secrets since March 2013. I'm Ryan Ellis, your solo host today. My wife Bev isn't here for this particular extravaganza because it's a Friday, and she doesn't do the movie talk thing at the end of the week. She'll be back on Monday, though, when we post our Oscars preview show, where we'll break down the Academy Awards in pretty thorough detail. I mentioned that we discuss old movies. Well, February just happens to be what we're calling Old Love Month. For 4 years, we've filled February with chats about romantic films. In this case, all the movies have a passionate theme, but also came out a lifetime ago. Multiple lifetimes in some cases. So, old love. Okay, let's set it up. The Doorbell Bonging Postal Worker, 2 times, was released by MGM in early May 1946, and people turned out to see it. The Numbers, that box office site I've mentioned many times, has this 7th at the domestic box office in 1946. Notorious, was 2nd, and The Best Years of Our Lives was 3rd. Best. While Gilda was 9th. We have reviewed all 3 of those other classics. They're in the archives. It's a Wonderful Life came out that year too, but as I recall, one of the most beloved films of all time was a mite bit of a box office dud when it first came out. Now I can tell you that since I watched The Postman on TCM, I took a look at Eddie Muller's intro before the feature started, and he said this movie was 4th at the box office, not 7th, and that it was behind Song of the South at number 1, yep, that one, The Best Years of Our Lives at number 2, not number 3, and Duel in the Sun at number 3. So, I don't know, who's right? I don't know. Muller also said it was the most financially successful noir of the post-war era. I don't know if that's true or not either, but I can believe it. Here's a question for you. What was the most financially successful noir of the during the war era? I don't know. He didn't say that. In case you haven't seen The Postman Always Rings Twice before and wouldn't mind a plot description, or maybe you have seen it and just want a reminder of what we're talking about, I'll give you that right now. So Tay Garnett directs a screenplay by Harry Ruskin and Niven Bush, based on James M Cain's novel. Lana Turner, and hopefully I'm consistent about that today, not Lana, but Lana. Lana Turner is Cora Smith, and John Garfield is Frank Chambers. She works at a California roadside diner with Nick, her older husband, who she later says to Frank is a man she never loved. Cecil Kellaway plays him. Cora eventually falls hard for drifter Nick, who works in the diner with the Smiths. They have a torrid affair, and after many twists and turns in this story, they kill Nick and try to make it look like an accident. They somehow don't fry for that, but after more twists and turns, Cora ends up dead, and Frank is blamed for it, so he ends up in death row anyway, where we find he's been the narrator all along. Or, in a nutshell, Postman rang twice back in the 40s? My mailman never even rings once, and I feel left out. Okay, that's not a good nutshell, but I had to do one. All right, well, facts and figures time. The film scores quite well on Rotten Tomatoes. It's at 89% with the critics, and it's at 79% on the popcorn meter. The critical average is 8 out of 10. There are 25 fresh reviews and only 3 bad ones. I was surprised to see that Bob Rafelson's 1981 Postman is a fresh tomato too. It's at 79%. I was under the impression that people weren't fond of the Jack Nicholson and Jessica Lange version. And maybe they weren't when it came out over 40 years ago, but then it got better notices over time. Could be that. You can add reviews to Rotten Tomatoes anytime, I think, critics or audiences for the popcorn meter. Oh, and Costner's The Postman, by the way, is only at 14%. Why did I tell you that? I don't know. I just have a thing for mailman right now. Or mail women, letter carriers. Well, in any case, the 1946 Postman is the best reviewed film of Lana Turner's career. The reviews for The Bad and the Beautiful, my favorite of her films, are her third best reviews. That's the other flick of hers that's been reviewed on this channel. John Garfield has 4 films with perfect 100% ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, although beyond those, the only one of his that outdoes this is Body and Soul, the boxing movie that I covered nearly 2 years ago. This motion picture didn't get any Oscar nominations, and it's not in the Library of Congress either. No National Film Registry induction for The Postman. I was surprised. I almost forgot to look for that stuff. Right before I started recording, I thought, wait a minute, I don't have a section for that. Where is it? Oh, nothing for either of those things, Oscars or Library of Congress. But the AFI, there is stuff. The 2-time ringer was ranked 49th on the American Film Institute's Top 100 Passions. The 1981 Postman was up for the Passions list too, by the way, although it didn't make the cut. Tay Garnett's Sex Thriller was also nominated for the Top 100 Thrills, the Top 100 Genres in the Mystery category. It's not really a mystery, but I guess it fits that whole theme. A lot of noirs on that list, or nominated at least. And Cora Smith had enough verve to be a candidate for the Top 50 Villains list. The AFI ranked teams of heroes and villains on that list plenty of times. I'd say that Cora and Frank probably should have been nominated together, not just her on her own. The flick was also a nominee for the Top 100 Quotes and the 2007 AFI Top 100 list, so the main greatest movies of all time list, but not the 1998 version of 100 Years, 100 Movies. That quote, by the way, that it was nominated for is when Frank says, "With my brains and your looks, we could go places." A quote that's been sweeping the nation, lo, these past 79 years. Well, now we know that this film has all kinds of kudos and plaudits. You got Mueller raving about it on TCM. Am I about to rave? Let's find out. As always back in this era, we get the opening titles with dramatic music, then it's right into Garfield's voiceover. Frank talks about hitchhiking from San Francisco to San Diego, although he doesn't have a specific destination in mind. The guy he was hitching a ride with wonders why he's just drifting around like this. And he doesn't really seem to know. It's just a bunch of stuff that happened, Marge. Although I bet most drifters probably don't know why they can't get settled in one place. That's what makes them drifters. The driver of the car is the DA, the district attorney in this area, Kyle Sackett, played by Leon Ames. He's not going to be in the movie for a while after this, but we are going to see him again. Frank spots a man wanted sign outside a roadside diner/gas station called the Twin Oaks. "My pine, Twin Pines, Ma." And Nick Smith comes up to say hello, basically making Franco take the gig. The boss is more enthusiastic about hiring the guy than the guy is enthusiastic about being hired. And when they go inside to tend to some beef frying on the grill, that's when he sees Cora. He was alerted to Lana Turner's presence when her lipstick rolled across the floor and over his way. Frank checks out her form thoroughly while waiting for her to come take the stick from him. Who could blame him for letting his eyes do some wandering? For a Code-era production and a movie made by the usually classy MGM, Turner shows a decent amount of skin in this, even a lot, considering all those things. She's hot in this flick. Have I said that once? I'll probably say it 2 or 3 more times. After burning the hamburger he was supposed to be taking care of, Franklin keeps on burning things. This time it's that man wanted sign. "What are you doing? You're a drifter. You know you're not going to work there forever, man. That's what being a drifter is all about." He's like those people who see a help wanted sign in a restaurant window and take the sign with them when they go inside. This job is definitely going to be mine. But that's pretty bold. Maybe your resume's inadequate. Or what if you blow the interview? Stop assuming. Anyway, that night, Cora suggests to her husband that he just give Frank a week's pay and let him go. She can sense him working there is not a good idea, in the sense that her eyeballs and perhaps her lower body parts yearn for this young Chambers fellow already. Cecil Kellaway's jib's got nothing on John Garfield's. She likes the cut of that jib. But he won't do that, so Cora tries to make the new man quit by demanding that he paint all the chairs in the diner just to give him busy work. Frank decides, though, to grab her by both arms, as actors tended to do to actresses back then, and kisses her right on the mouth. When the kiss is complete, Turner's response is cool. She just touches up her lipstick and walks away. Frank's voiceover talks about how she didn't even speak to him for weeks after that, and he knew she hated him for the unrequested smooch. At least she didn't tell her husband what he did. Nick isn't the violent type, and Frank could surely handle himself, but he might have gotten punched for locking lips with the landlord's lady love. But Frank seems to get along with Nick pretty well, and vice versa. Plus, Frank just said in that voiceover that Cora had been cold-shouldering him for quite a long time. So rather than cut his losses and move on down the road, is this just a case of, I want her, and I don't care about the consequences type stuff, that he keeps flirting with her? Well, we'd have no movie if he leaves. That's the real answer. Turner's supposed to be a bad, bad girl doing bad, bad things throughout this movie, but in the early going, she's not encouraging him. It's certainly nothing like the way Barbara Stanwyck plays with Fred McMurray in Double Indemnity, like she's the cat and he's the nip. And maybe I'm a dummy, but I was reading Turner's attitude as maybe not exactly loving her husband, but at least liking him well enough. She isn't playing that she's grossed out by him in the early going anyway, not like she supposedly is in the book. Nick has a hankering to play some music one night and strums on a guitar for his wife and his employee, suggesting the two people dance together. She tries her best to avoid having the hot young thing touch her that way, but arms and groins must touch if we're going to get a movie worthy of AFI's passions list. So she does dance with Frankie for a few seconds, until she abruptly pulls away. She tells the knicker it's just too hot to dance. I think that was a euphemism in addition to being a comment on the weather conditions. There's stuff online that says Lana and John got it on off camera. A friend of Garfield said he didn't tend to sleep with his co-stars, but nude contact did happen between these two, I think during production, and that while they obviously have heat on camera, they didn't have so much once Garnett said cut. Turner was married a lot of the years of her life, although she wasn't at this point from what I saw, but Garfield was. Not that I'm passing judgment on them spending sexy time behind their spouses' backs. It's none of my business. But sometimes these things are relevant to the story because look at the story they're telling here. Anyway, she wants to go to the beach, but Nick doesn't, so he sends Frank off in his place. Nick is really oblivious to not see there's something going on between them. Go ahead, take my wife. Please. Well, you might pay for that, and you're going to. Now, this movie predates From Here to Eternity's famous beach kiss between Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr, but it does have the Turn and the Gar frolicking in the not-so-warm surf for a bit. It's effective, too. Not From Here to Eternity levels, but it's effective. And she's loosening up. She even smiles at him. When they get back that night, Frank kisses her again, even though she says, please don't, right before he pulls her in close. And she doesn't encourage him. She just takes off into the house. You can't call her a tease. She's doing everything she can to get him to cool it. So again, I question that Cora Smith's reputation as an evil snake who all along is manipulating Frank into greasing Nick. At some point that's going to happen, yeah, but not yet. Maybe that's a weakness in her otherwise great performance, or Garnett bunged it up with the takes he used or the way he shot it. Or he's just going for more subtlety than you might expect from a femme fatale. The next day, Nick drives to L.A. on business, so it's just the Franker and the Cora working the place. While doing the dishes, Cora talks about how her looks always got her all kinds of attention, but she wanted someone to take care of her, not just undress her with their eyes. Nick just decided to propose to her one day, and she said yes. I guess so, she'd be taken care of in this diner. Nick isn't rich, but he isn't dirt poor either. But she doesn't love him, and I guess she never did. Which I find funny because I felt like Garnett had her playing the scene so far as if she had at least some affection for him. What did you think? Am I way off on this? Or are you with the people that say, oh my God, what a villainous, snaky woman, terrible, awful? I didn't see it at this point. Anyway, they don't kiss right here, but you know they're about to do just that, and a lot more. This scene, though, is really sexy, especially for 1946, and especially since the production code already made them tone down a lot of what's in James Cain's book. The next scene is a close-up of a letter that just says, Nick, I'm going away with Frank. I love him. Cora, which she leaves in the cash register. Love? Huh? Seems more like infatuation, since you two have barely spent any time together and she's been in cold shoulder mode almost the entire time he's worked there. But all right, it's love, Cora. In any case, I get a kick out of Frank's take after she says, it's too bad Nick took the car, because they could just drive off if he didn't, because Frank's response is that stealing a man's wife is nothing. Stealing a man's car is larceny. In 2025, I'm sure that line would boil the blood of many a person. It probably did somewhat back then. Since they're carless, they have to walk on the shoulder of the highway, which is where he was when the movie started, but she immediately takes a tumble, getting quite dirty in the process. Then her shoes get scuffed too, and she's fed up, even though they don't seem to have been walking for very long. It also dawns on her during this stroll that if she divorces Nick, she'll get nothing. He'll keep the diner and all the money they do have. When she was an unhappy woman back at the Twin Oaks, at least she had some kind of future, and she wants to be somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am, let's face it, Charlie. Not that running a diner in the middle of nowhere is some dream job, but it's definitely more than what she sees for them if they did run away together. She disagrees with Bon Jovi and Living on a Prayer that Tommy and Gina had each other and that's a lot. Cora has no desire to bring home her pay just for love. That was terrible, wasn't it? They get back to the diner before Nick does, so she yanks the bye-bye baby note she'd left in the cash register before her man could find it. They also spot Nick driving home drunk. He nearly gets into a head-on collision with a truck, but swerves out of the way just in time, which gives them, bing, an idea. And it's one that many characters in noir films have had. If the person with the money can find a way to get themselves dead, then the one who's married to them gets to enjoy the kitty. The loot, the sommeliers. But before that plot can be hatched, booze-eyed Nick sees the suitcases they left down in the diner and accuses Frank of stealing stuff, meaning he was going to live up to his drifter status and split, but take some souvenirs with him. Cora's clever and claims that Frank was, yes, thinking of splitting, so she gave him their spare suitcase in exchange for a few days of pay he had coming. Nice cover story. The next voiceover has Frank talking about how he's become obsessed with Cora, which he really was, wasn't he? But he also knows he should have bailed once he found out she didn't want him badly enough to risk losing everything. A week passes with him pining for the sexy platinum blonde, even though she's again been ignoring him all this time. I guess the nutshell in this movie could have been hot and cold. She really does go hot and cold on him. And God, her hair looks so white in a black and white movie. I'm not complaining. It pops, which isn't easy to do in a black and white movie. And she's often, or I guess pretty much always, wearing a white dress or the white diner's uniform. It's a nice contrast from what you usually see in these kinds of movies, which is to dress a femme fatale in dark colors. But whatever she's wearing, it's time to go over to the dark side, if you will, because she goes to Frank that night and suggests that if he wants to be with her, that he needs to grease her lawfully married husband. He's often joking in this movie that he wants Nick to die, but then claims this time that he doesn't actually mean it. But she does. She tells Frank she loves him, and he believes her. So their plan is to have him put a big old pile of ball bearings into a sock so he can wail on the old man's head with it while he's in the bath. Blunt force trauma. They'll play it like Nicky Baby hit his head falling while getting into the tub. And she only realized it happened, officer, when she saw water dripping through the ceiling. I don't think I mentioned the cop that Frank met in the beginning of the movie, the one who told our man that the DA was the one who gave him that ride. Well, he stops by the Oaks and spots the stepladder outside that was part of the ball bearings to the brain plan, so seeing it there by the side of the building could incriminate them. But a cat somehow causes a power outage, and I guess this was after Cora had bashed her hubby in the hoot with the ball bearings. They're in for a penny and all that at this point. But Nick doesn't die. He even wakes up in the hospital that night. And he doesn't remember what happened except that everything went dark. The two attempted murderers plan to carry on as normal, acting like nothing nefarious happened the night before, but the cop and the DA show up right after they get back home. The two men see the very dead cat laying by the foot of the ladder, and then they seem satisfied that their story checks out. Well, they're pretending to. They drive off, giving Frank and Cora a chance to talk about what their next move is, which Frank says is no move. If Nick dies in some other way now, he figures the authorities will know it couldn't be coincidence that he almost died once, and then did die. But the hospital calls to tell Mrs. Smith that Mr. Smith will in fact be all right. He just needs to recover in the hospital for about a week, which gives the two lovers a chance to run the diner together and, presumably, do some serious bumping whenever they get the chance. Frank cuts his losses, though, and vacates the premises the day that Cora drives Nick home, because he doesn't really see how this can possibly work anymore. He also runs pretty hot and cold in this movie, doesn't he? But sometime later, Nick is buying supplies at the market in Los Angeles and spots Frank lurking nearby. The formerly low man on the Twin Oaks totem pole didn't go far away like he should have, because A, the plot demands this, and B, you know the horny man can't really just leave. He's the kind of guy who knows that continuing to do heroin is going to kill him, yet he just can't ditch that needle. Nick brings Frank back to the diner because he wants to let both he and Cora know that he's going to sell the place. The money men in town want to put in a 4-lane highway, and the offer to sell was too good to pass up. I guess the idea is that Nick told the new owners that one condition is that they keep Frank on, right? Is that what happened there? I think so. Because if not, what does it matter if Frank hears about any of this? Nick's plans for the Smiths to move to Canada so they can take care of his paralyzed sister. He's also sure to get a nice inheritance when old sis dies, which might not be for a while. What a 40s move. Make all these big plans without even telling your wife about any of it. And the real kicker is that when they get to Sister Smith's abode up in the Great White North, Cora, you're going to have to adapt to Canadian winters and take care of a paralyzed person you've never even met. God, this guy's just asking for them to kill him. That night, Frank finds Cora holding a big knife in the kitchen, thinking about using it on herself. She wishes the Frank man had never come back because she might have been able to take this life if he hadn't. But now that he's there again, and there's this news about moving to northern Canada, she's pretty distraught. So, knife time. But Frank vows to kill Nick after all, so they can be together, and this relocation idea will fizzle away. Fine, we don't want you guys up here anyway. The new blueprint of a plan is to get Nick very drunk, then they'll crack up his car and he really will end up deader than a doornail this time. There's a recurring line I thought we'd get at a key point in the ending, deader than a doornail. They say it a lot in this section, he and the DA or the cop or both. Anyway, do it right and it'll look like he brought this on himself. After all, he's already been wasted while driving once during this movie. Nick has, that is. The DA shows up at the Twin Oaks to get some air in his tires and sees how sauced Nick is and how loaded Frankie is pretending to be. Cora is sober, though, so she does the driving as they head off. This is all performative. Well, Nick really is drunk. And Sackett clearly sees all this. Once they get a little ways away, Franco wallops Nico and the noodle with a bottle they'd been sharing and kills him. Only Garnett doesn't show a close-up of the treacherous lady with a smile on her face as it's happening, as you get in Double Indemnity. Although in both movies, the femme fatale is the one doing the driving. The husband's in the passenger seat, and the killer, the lover, is in the back seat. They push the car off a cliff, but it doesn't go down very far. While trying to push it further and make it look like Nick's head was hit by something other than a person using a bottle, Frank goes down with it and gets hurt legitimately. As Cora's crying for help, "Oh my God, oh, big disaster," we get a nice touch here with her voice echoing, 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 echoing. And guess who comes along? Sackett, who instantly figures out this was no accident. "This was not a boat accident." Sackett lets Frank know when he's laid up in the hospital that he was onto them ever since the bathtub gambit. And he also tells the Frankinator something that Frank really didn't know, that Nick bought a life insurance policy for $10,000 just a few days ago. $10,000. This angle seems a little forced. Why would Nick do that now? Maybe because he's planning to make a long trip to Canada? Although back in the 40s, did insurance companies honor benefits to people who take up residence in an entirely different country? I'm legitimately asking. I don't know. Do they do it now? Probably now, but did they do it back then? Sackett seems to know the two lovers were a team in this, but he gives Frank the idea to file a complaint against Cora, that if he really was drunk that night and he went over the cliff in that car along with Nick, then he could say she was trying to grease two people, not just her husband. And of course, Sackett witnessed him being drunk, supposedly. Sackett even figures out that Cora didn't jump free when the car started going down like she claims, because she was already nearly back up on the road, almost immediately, and had her handbag with her when that happened. I guess this is like when some mob underling turns state's evidence against the big boss and gets immunity in exchange for yapping. He's a traitor, but at least he saves his own neck. It's a curious twist here that Sackett is somewhat inventing a story for Frank to save his own hide, but some of it's also true. The DA gets Frank to sign a paper to confirm all this, and this is where Hume Cronin finally enters the movie, and I would say pretty much steals it. He says he's Cora's attorney, Arthur Keats. He and Sackett are friendly with each other, but Artie here seems like he's a shark in a way that the DA isn't. Keats is confident he can get her off, which seems irrational considering all the things that are stacked up against her. The next thing we see is Cora being charged with Nick's murder, and Keats saying they want to plead guilty. "I can get her off, plead guilty. What's going on?" She's shocked, but doesn't object. This is obviously a surprise to her, but can he just do this? Your lawyer's hired for a reason, because they know the law better than you do. But they can't just make these kinds of moves without your consent, right? Especially plead guilty to murder? Frank sees all this with his broken left arm, and he's in a wheelchair in court, and then he ends up in a room with Cora, alone together, and she accuses him of setting her up, and that he's the one using Keats to do all this. Frank, though, thinks that lawyer is just a stoolie for the cops, and neither of them believes the other. A fellow we'll get to know a little better later on comes in and types up her confession that these two planned the murder together, although she blames Frank for doing what he actually did do, which was to bottle bash Mr. Smith in the back of the booper. So he is the unequivocal killer. He's the one that actually killed the guy. I guess she feels that if she has to go down, then he's going down too, and they both should. They did plan this thing together. She also gets it on record that she didn't know anything about a $10,000 life insurance policy. On the day of the trial, Keats pulls a fast one on us and says that Cora pleads, "Not guilty." She didn't see this coming either because, well, this fancy lawyer just gets to do whatever he wants. Keats claims he's learned new facts about the case and was hasty in saying during the arraignment that she was guilty. He tells Sackett in private that there's no way he can actually prove she or they tried to kill Nick, so he should settle for a plea of manslaughter. She does plead guilty to that, and Keats asks the judge to sentence her right there, right then. Sackett is the one who pipes up that Cora should get leniency because, even though he has no reasonable doubt that Cora's guilty and says that, proving it would be impractical, and he wants to save the people of California the hassle of a long trial. And the judge gives her probation. Okay, first-time offender and all that, but what? All she gets is probation for manslaughter? You don't do at least a few years for that? Keats warns Cora and Frank on the drive back home that they better not step out of line at all, or Sackett will find a way to throw them in jail for a very long time. Since Cora does get that 10 grand from the insurance company, her lawyer figures that if they couldn't find her guilty of murder, and that they did pay out what they owed Nick's widow, that they'd go that far, then there's no way the DA could get a conviction. All this happened so they could be together, and yet Cora is no longer moony over Frank. Moony. Even when they're alone together. So she's not acting about not wanting him anymore. When she reopens the diner, he'll just be an employee. And business is great because people want to lay eyes on a woman who had been accused of murder. She uses the insurance money to gussy up the outside of the place and to get a license to sell beer. The patio out there is actually pretty sweet. I'd eat there, even if I was a little bit worried that this woman might poison my food. Time passes and Cora is living up to her vow that she'll make something of herself, which is when Keats comes by to warn them that people are talking about them living together, and yet they're unmarried. Some weddings are business arrangements and business arrangements only, and this is one of those. But after they toast their not-so-happy union, Cora gets word that her mother has had a heart attack. This film isn't lacking for story beats and plot lines, is it? So she hops on a train to go see Mama while Frank says goodbye, and then immediately lays eyes on Madge Gorland at the station. Audrey Totter plays Madge. She can't get her car to start, so Frank offers to help and charms her the way he did Cora at the beginning of the film. I think the dialogue's even similar, if not the same. And off they drive to Mexico. There's not much else for Audrey Totter to do in this movie other than this scene. I guess they filmed more scenes with her, and then they ended up cutting them out, including that she was a lion tamer. Frank spends a week or so gallivanting with Madge, and then Cora's due back. Her mother did end up dying, so now Turner's wearing all black. She was always in white before this. Now, sure, she's grieving Mama's death, but I think it's also a deliberate costuming choice. Not that she's about to break bad, because she already did, but that things are about to get far worse for her than they already have. Costuming choices can mean a lot. I don't talk about costumes in this podcast very often, but they can be very critical, especially in movies like this. The guy who would go on to be the voice of Fred Flintstone, Alan Reed, yabba dabba doo, plays Ezra Kennedy, the one who typed up her confession at the courthouse. And we also learn here that he's Keats's investigator. He shows up to blackmail them because he has that piece of paper. So pony up a lot of dough, or he'll give that confession to Sackett. He wants $12,000. They only got $10,000 she did in the settlement from the insurance company. And he even brought a gun to make sure that people guilty of killing someone don't do that to him. Only he's careless and Frank gets the drop on him, beating him up after Cora distracts him with a drink in his face. While Cora goes on as normal outside with her customers, Frank makes Kennedy call his partner who's holding the confession, and pictures of it too. Frank gets all the incriminating pages from them and burns them the way he did that man wanted sign, after making sure the attempted blackmailers hit the bricks. So they're safe again, and maybe now all is well, until Cora reveals that Madge showed up and told her about the fling she had with Frank. And she's mad about it. She can't be put on trial for Nick's murder again. Double jeopardy, baby. But Frank can be. Welcome to Camp Distrust. She worries he might kill her, and he worries that she might call Sackett. I like this touch, that even though she says she doesn't love him anymore after he was willing to send her up after the accident, she's also jealous that he was doing some bumping with somebody else, proving she does still have feelings for the man who wiped out her husband. I guess part of the reason she's so furious is because she's carrying his baby. He still loves her, and hearing that she's got a little life in her oven isn't scaring him off, so that's something. And by the way, I was wrong about that whole costume thing because she's wearing white all the time again, so I guess I was wrong that she was going to wear black for the rest of the movie. Cora says she couldn't turn in her man just so they could gas him to death, especially now that she knows he's the father of her kitty kid. She actually softens and basically admits she wants one more round with him. One more round. They head to the beach to enjoy a swim, and I have to say, Turner's hair looks fantastic in this scene. Normally she wears that, a turban that covers most of her hair? Here it's not constrained by headgear. It's wet, and it's fantastic. She claims they swam out too far, though, and she won't be able to make it back. So if he really wants to be rid of her, he can just let her drown. But he's no Monty Clifton, a place in the sun. He wants his wife to live. So he helps her get back to shore, and all seems good between them. Until he's watching her and not the road while driving home. Garnett, or the stunt director, I guess, stage a lame one-car accident in this scene where the jalopy careens into a fence. This accident would cause damage to the car and to her, sure, but this is enough to kill Cora. Come on! She should be injured no worse than Frank was when Nick's car practically fell on top of him, not dead. Although major kudos for the callback when, after Frank gets out of the car and is shocked to see that she no longer is alive, Her hand falls, and she drops her lipstick. That's all we see of her is her, I think, left hand. That's how he first saw her, and us too, I guess. And now it's how he last sees her, dropping her lipstick. I think they even used the same sound effect, even though the stick wouldn't sound on the floor of the car like it would have on the floor of the diner. He is convicted of her murder, and the jury barely even discussed the possibility that he might be innocent. I guess they walked into the jury room and said, "Should we 12 Angry Men this thing?" "Nah, he's guilty, baby. No Henry Fonda's here. And he's going to be breathing in some gas pellets." Sackett shows up in his cell, and Frank tries to convince him to get a stay of execution. Only the sack man found the note Cora had left in the cash register the night she was going to leave, the night she told Frank she was preggers. It says enough on that paper to get him convicted of Nick's murder after all. So no matter what, he's going to die at the hands of the state, either because of Nick or because of Cora. Frank accepts that his goose is very cooked. We finally get a reason for the title of the movie, as he goes on about how the postman always rings twice, i.e. that you might get away with something like this once, but not a second time. He literalizes it by saying you might not hear the doorbell when the mail carrier rings it the first time, but you do the second time. Do you, necessarily? If you're indisposed, in the shower, not home, you're not going to hear it the second time either. And Cora paid the price for Nick's death by dying in a different car accident, and now Frank is going to pay for killing Nick by way of his unintentional killing of Cora. As someone put it online, she died because of his lust. He was hot for her and not watching the road, and his yearning for her is what got all of them in this trouble in the first place. Although she probably would have found some other guy to mess around with at some point and do some of these things anyway. The Coens did something similar in The Man Who Wasn't There, where Billy Bob is executed for the wrong murder. So his official death, just like Frank here, was for one person, when he deserved it for killing someone else. But I guess it all evens out. You know who he is? Even Steven. Garfield plays this last few seconds of the film almost like he's happy to have figured this all out. It's a weird tone he takes here, and I don't really approve of how Cain wrote this, or the screenwriters did it, or how Garnett chose to film it. But as long as the priest who's there in the jail cell with Frank will say a prayer and root for him to end up in the afterlife with Cora, then he's all right with ending up deader than a doornail. I don't think he said the deader than a doornail thing. I added that there. But okay, what? It's not like Garfield played Frank Chambers as Mr. Tough Guy. I can go and I'm good with dying. Throw the switch. What's that movie, Sin City, where he says that? But to be this accepting of his fate? Where is this coming from? I wouldn't say the ending ruined the movie, but it sure didn't help it. I don't fully buy that Keyes and Neff would say they love each other at the very end of Double Indemnity either, but at least that's played with a certain level of sadness. Not, "Oh, golly gee, you got me. I did it. Jeepers, I hope Cora's waiting for me up in heaven where we'll finally be happy together, because the two of us are definitely heaven-bound." And he's implying that because he's telling a priest, "Pray for me." Tell me, do you agree? That's a bad ending. Well, anyway, the cast. Lana Turner reportedly said this was the best role she ever got to play. She was top billed here, and even though Kirk Douglas was clearly the star of The Bad and the Beautiful, she was top billed in that too. And while she hasn't lasted in people's minds the way Hepburn and Crawford and Garland and Bette Davis have, she was just as talented as they were. Well, maybe not quite as talented, but close enough. When she was good, she was very good. Turner's career lasted nearly 50 years, even though she was just working in television shows like The Love Boat and Falcon Crest once we hit the 80s. Just as I was reading that Bette Davis was apparently shocked that she didn't get an Oscar nomination for this performance, I'm a bit surprised that Lana didn't make the AFI's top 25 greatest actresses list. She had a more memorable career, I'd say a better career, than at least a few of the women who did make that cut. As for her resume, many people are big fans of some of her other works, like Imitation of Life and Peyton Place, and that was the only performance that ever got her an Oscar nomination, Peyton Place. Those are good roles, but I don't think either of them stands out as much as this or The Bad and the Beautiful. When Bev and I reviewed Father of the Bride back on February 3rd, we talked about how Elizabeth Taylor was married 8 times. Well, so was Lana Turner, including twice to Stephen Crane, who was briefly an actor and then got into running restaurants. Old Steve got married 6 times himself. Lana's longest marriage only lasted for about 4 years, so obviously things were weird in her life. I'm happy for a very short period of time. Someone she didn't marry, but who was her boyfriend at one time, was a gangster named Johnny Stompanato. Her daughter stabbed and killed that wise guy in 1958, which was a huge scandal back then, and it should have been. Even if Johnny was violent with Lana, and I think that's why her daughter offed him, it's still a juicy story and extremely scandalous, breaking news, that I don't assume helped her career. Did it? I don't remember how that went, actually. I don't think it did. Turner's lust buddy in this movie, the man born Jacob Garfinkel, was of course in Body and Soul, which I reviewed a year and a half ago. We had never looked at a John Garfield flick before I covered that. Johnny Boy only made 34 movies in total and was just 39 when he died of a coronary thrombosis, which Bev can tell you from experience is a fancy phrase for a blood clot. He was just turning into a big star when he died after putting together a strong body of work in the 40s. Body and Soul and the Best Picture winning Gentleman's Agreement both came out the year after this did. Plus he was in a gem called Force of Evil in that same time frame. I'd say he was better in Force of Evil than he was in Body and Soul, actually, even though his work in the boxing movie represents one of his 2 Oscar nominations. As rarely as we've discussed Turner or Garfield before today, we have spoken about Cecil Kellaway several times. He was in Wuthering Heights, plus he played Dr. Chumley in that tomfoolery known as Harvey, the one about the invisible 6-foot rabbit. He'd be delighted. And he played the Monsignor in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Spencer Tracy's friend, which was Spencer's last film, and was one of the final ones for Kellaway, too. I like also that we have Nick and Cora, because the 2 main characters in the Thin Man movies are Nick and Nora. I don't think that was intentional, since James Cain's book came out right around the time The Thin Man as a movie came out. One couldn't really have been referencing the other. Or maybe it was, I don't know. Leon Ames had been in a film we discussed a few years ago, which was Meet Me in St. Louis. Ames also worked with Turner again in Peyton Place, and he played Stanley Banks in the Father of the Bride TV series in the 60s. And I bring that up because we reviewed the 1950 Father of the Bride just a few weeks ago, and it starred the guy I just said, Spencer Tracy. Hume Cronyn won the 1985 Best Supporting Actor Oscar for Cocoon, although we haven't reviewed that, and we probably won't. We did talk about Cronyn in Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, which came out in 1943, which just so happens to be Hume's first year making movies. There's a name for you, Hume Cronyn. He was still working in showbiz about 60 years later, too. Oh, he's also apparently in Spartacus, which we reviewed, although I don't remember him being in that, but it says he was. Audrey Totter was in all sorts of things, especially TV shows in the latter part of her career, but we've not reviewed her before now. I will highly recommend a cool boxing movie called The Setup, which Robert Wise directed. She's Robert Ryan's love interest in that. It's on TCM all the time. I think I've seen it there at least 3 times in the past few months. Not that I've watched it each time, but I mean, I've seen it in the guide. So if you believe me when I recommend something, then check that one out, The Setup. Their director was Tay Garnett. Tay is short for Taylor, which is actually his middle name. His first name was William. The internet dishes about how he was a drinker and battled his alcohol addiction while they were shooting this, especially when they hit a snag and there was a delay during the production. This was a pretty long shoot by 40 standards, partly because Garnett wanted to do what MGM rarely did back then, especially for a lower budget movie. Well, maybe not low budget, but it wasn't Gone with the Wind. And that was shoot on location. That wasn't on location either, I guess, was it? But I'm just saying that was a huge budget thing. They could get what they wanted more so. But bad weather messed things up for them for a while. I would say he's pretty lucky Louis B. Mayer didn't replace him through all that, because it sounds like he had to dry out for a while before he could go back to work. Studio heads weren't exactly forgiving back then. Not that they're remotely close to saints now, and this isn't exactly a big-name director, but they didn't fire him. The Tay Man hasn't been featured on this channel before today, but he did also direct Greer Garson and Walter Pidgeon in Mrs. Parkington. He was also the man in charge of a pretty good war movie called Baton, which was nominated for the AFI's 1998 version of 100 Years, 100 Movies. So yeah, it's not like Tay Garnett stands out as a big-name director or anything, but he was involved in some high-profile stuff. And The Postman Always Rings Twice has obviously stood the test of time. I've been critical, but the movie is good. Screenwriters Harry Ruskin and Niven Bush adapted James M Cain's 1934 novel. Ruskin's credits include a lot of Dr. Kildare and Andy Hardy movies. We think they make a lot of sequels now. There were so many films in those 2 series. Bush had involvement in big titles like Duel in the Sun and the Best Picture winning Gigi, but he also wrote novels. Speaking of books, the writer of the novel this picture was based on, James M Cain, told Turner that he was very impressed with her performance. I guess she even exceeded the character he had in his head when he wrote the book. The Production Code Administration had major concerns with Cain's lurid material, which is why it took so long to get it to the screen. Many changes had to be made, although there were a couple of adaptations of this book made in Europe first, one in France and one in Italy. So Cain made some bucks by selling it to them before it ever got to Hollywood. And it's been remade a few times since. Obviously, the Nicholson-Lang one. I think maybe a German movie in the last 20 or so years. Jared Chow, something. Kerry Wilson was the producer. He had 30 producer credits in total, but he was better known as a writer of a lot of those Andy Hardy movies I mentioned a minute ago. Plus, he had a hand in 2 films we have covered, Mutiny on the Bounty and A Night at the Opera, which have nothing in common with The Postman, or with each other, other than that the 2 of them did make the AFI's Top 100 list. And funny enough, they effectively swapped places. Mutiny made it in 98, but not in 2007, while Opera didn't make it in 98, but did make it in 2007. Sidney Wagner shot Postman, George White cut it, and George Bassman, probably Bassman, was the music composer. Wagner was, or maybe it's Wagner, I don't know, but it's spelled Wagner, was working in black and white here, and also in the typical square 1:3:3:1 ratio they always used in this era. Widescreen was still several years away. TCM's print was pretty good. It's a very solid-looking movie. Wagner was up for a couple of Oscars for some films I didn't recognize, plus he went uncredited on Mutiny on the Bounty. Georgie Boy also shot Baton for Tay Garnett. George White's only Oscar nom for his cutting came on Green Dolphin Street, which this film's producer, Kerry Wilson, produced as well, and he also rewrote that. Wilson did. As for Bassman, he came up with music for plenty of films, but his bigger list of credits on the IMDb is for conducting and orchestrating classics like Big Breath, The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Meet John Doe, Bambi, Adam's Rib, and Marty. Those are 6 films we have yapped about in the past. So it's time to start putting finishing touches on my thoughts about this one, which I liked. I didn't love it the way Eddie Muller obviously does. He said in that intro on TCM that it's the most popular and influential noir story of them all. Plus he said it's the most successful post-war noir. But is it? Is it even in your own personal top 5? Let's not even count modern noirs like, well, they're not modern, but they're in my lifetime at least. Chinatown and LA Confidential, Body Heat, Devil in a Blue Dress, and so many others. But no, let's just stick with the old days, the 40s and 50s. Double Indemnity is, to me, number 1 all time when we talk about film noir. What about Maltese Falcon? That's a great one. That's on the short list. Shadow of a Doubt and Notorious, if they qualify, and I'm not sure if they do, but they were on lists when I looked online about the greatest noirs of all time. The Third Man, Touch of Evil, Laura. That's what, 7 titles off the top of my head? Well, I wrote them down off the top of my head. And I didn't even include The Postman Always Rings Twice. Sorry, Eddie. Mr. Muller, I'm not with you that this is the most popular and influential film in the genre. It's influential, it's popular, but not the most. Now, Cora Smith is a pretty great femme fatale, and Turner was rarely, if ever, better than this. But if she really is as evil as the AFI nomination would suggest, and as others say she is, then Garnett or Turner failed in the early scenes to make that as clear to me as they could have. I sympathize with her, quite a lot in fact, at least more than you should if she's supposed to be bad to every bone. She tells Frank no over and over again when he tries to seduce her. And none of this would have happened if Nick just did what she wanted and fired Frank before he even started working there, because she knew from the start he was bad news. I also felt like she was decidedly not playing contempt for Nick in the first 15 or 20 minutes, even though she talks later about hating him the whole time she knew him. But she wasn't playing that to me. I didn't think so. Not that every movie can be as great as Double Indemnity with a femme fatale like that. And how about this? Cain wrote that book too. But you know that Stanwyck is a villain in that from the start. She's always using McMurray. She never loves him. Not the way Cora does come to love Frank in this. And I think different times. She loves him, then she doesn't, then she loves him, then she doesn't. Or at least pretends she doesn't love him for a while. Cora is far more sympathetic than many villains in noir have been, and that's okay. But if we're talking the very best in this genre, then I don't think the leading character's motivation should be so mysterious. Of course, killing someone is bad no matter what. I seem to be the rare bleeding heart liberal who isn't cool with that Luigi doofus just murdering the healthcare CEO in the street. But you can see why Cora feels she has no choice, too. She makes an awful decision, but she's not cavalier about it. And I don't think she was always planning this or saw him and thought, ooh, a way out. I think it just happened. Regardless, Turner's beautiful in this, and I think she outshines Garfield, actually. It's good, but it's not his best work. But the heat between these two is very palpable. The movie succeeds big time on that front. It was a turn-on, especially before they went through with it and pitched Nick off a cliff. So if I sound like I'm mixed on this, I'm not really mixed. I like it. It's a 3-star motion picture, but I'm a little resentful of a reputable dude like Eddie Muller saying straight out that this is as good as it gets in one of my favorite genres because, dude, it's just not. But that was how I saw The Postman Always Rings Twice. Before I let you know what other podcasts we're going to be doing in the weeks ahead and also how to get in touch with us, let's talk trivia. I've got my usual 3 trivia questions, although there's no connecting theme to the movie I just reviewed the way there often is. These are just trivia questions. So here we go. Question number 1. Which Madonna song is psychoanalyzed by Mr. Brown in the opening diner scene in Reservoir Dogs? Question number 2. Who sings the song that Tom Cruise dances to in his underwear in Risky Business? And question number 3. The older version of Mike in 17 Again is the dearly departed Matthew Perry, who plays the younger version of Mike. All right, I'll share the answers to all those after I tell you that Bev will be back with me on Monday when we post our 10th annual Oscars preview podcast. 2024 was an odd year for movies, and it's not one of my favorites. But I'll save any more thoughts about that for that episode, and that's in 3 days. As for my next solo show, well, there are going to be a lot of those in the next little while. This episode goes up on February 21st, and Bev had her second heel surgery just 3 days earlier. We're trying to get way ahead, so she'll be able to be part of the podcast for a few more weeks. But after the March 3rd episode, I'll be doing this movie reviewing thing on my own, even on Mondays, for 3 or maybe 4 weeks. Pretty much all of Oscar month, or certainly most of Oscar month. But my next solo show will be on a Friday, and I think I'll be yapping about All the King's Men. I'm recording this episode nearly a month before the March 7th one, so I haven't locked in the schedule just yet. So I'll be taking a look at plenty of Best Picture winners next month, and All the King's Men will likely be the second one. It's going to be on TCM, so I'll record it and watch that. But that'll be the second one of the month, because the first one will be the March 3rd episode with Bev, and that'll be all about Rebecca. So Oscars preview 24th, Rebecca the 3rd, and I don't know for sure on March 7th. Did you like this show today with me rambling on here at the end? Well, tell me so. Even tell me if you didn't. Do you think Postman is the peak of the genre the way that Eddie Muller says it is, and you think I'm wrong to disagree? Let's hear about it. Write an email to haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to Have You Ever Seen in your podcast app. Rate the show. Write a review. Find us on YouTube as well. We're at HYES Ellis in the search bar. Comment on the tube, like the show, and subscribe to that channel. Social media-wise, I'm at MovieFiend51 on Twix and Ryan-Ellis on Blue Sky. Bev is at Bev Ellis Ellis on Elon's Vanity Project, although drop the at and just make it Bev Ellis Ellis to find her on Blue Sky. And for the love of Cora, get yourself some Sparkplug coffee. They offer our listeners a one-time 20% discount. Just use our HYES promo code. The website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Okay, the answers to those trivia questions now. Number 1. Which Madonna song is psychoanalyzed in the opening diner scene in Reservoir Dogs? Mr. Brown has all kinds of large penis theories about Like a Virgin. My favorite part is when Mr. Blue contributes that he was once a Madonna fan when she did Borderline, but then when she got into her Papa Don't Preach phase, he tuned her out. I just love thinking that that old dude was listening to Madonna at any stage of her career. Question number 2. Who sings the song Tom Cruise dances to in his underwear in Risky Business? Very famous scene. You know the song is Old Time Rock and Roll, but it's by Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. And question number 3, very easy one here for a lot of people, I'm sure. The older version of Mike in 17 Again is the dearly departed Matthew Perry, who plays the younger version of Mike. Fans of the film know the answer before I even finished asking it. It's Zac Efron, who's actually top billed, not Matthew Perry. And that's that for this review. Thanks for listening to me today. This is the last episode of Old Love Month, by the way, because we have the Oscars preview on the 24th, and then February's over. Meantime, I'm going to flip burgers in a diner and hope the sexy wife there takes an interest in me. I'll just make sure to keep my eye on the road if we're ever in a car together. And cut.